The problem with the Washington summit, I suppose, is that the White House tableau was all smiles, compliments, and choreographed unity, but the essentials were missing. There was no agreed map, really. No enforceable mechanism, no shared definition of what a guarantee would mean. And meanwhile, the Kremlin left Alaska the other day with all the optics it wanted and the initiative it prizes. Wordplay is a weak currency with a counterpart in Moscow that specializes in wordplay, and I don't think that that English wordplay can match the sort of stuff the Russians enjoy. The meeting produced upbeat talk of security guarantees and a prospective trilateral meeting with Putin, or indeed even a bilateral meeting with Putin. It didn't produce the elements that guarantee anything credible: signatures, triggers, timelines, forced commitments, and penalties for breach. When Russia was striking Kharkiv and Zaporizhia during the very hours of unity in Washington, the message from Moscow is brutally literal. That is not the posture of a party deterred by fancy communiques. Trump has made it clear that he and Putin are the central brokers, with Europe as a chorus. He boasted of a call before the meeting and another after it, and that framing matters. It sidelines the coalition that pays, arms and absorbs the risk, and elevates a dyad in which the Kremlin excels at extracting concessions by stages. Even sympathetic coverage confirms Trump paused his European session to ring Putin. That is theatre with consequences. Anchorage in Alaska yielded no ceasefire, but it gave Putin two gifts: parity optics and economic signalling. The red carpet suggested rehabilitation. The cash for jet fuel story underlined that sanctions bite, yet it also let Moscow claim that it can navigate these sanctions. In Moscow's media line, the point of Alaska was not a deal, but a reset of status and tempo. And that makes Washington's conviviality the second act in a script that Russia is already writing. The most touted novelty was the security guarantees. Trump's envoy floated NATO-style protections, and Trump himself said Ukraine would get very good security. Well, more than Bucharest, more than Minsk? That is rhetoric until the legal plumbing is defined. If the design mirrors the Istanbul 2022 drafts, it risks the same fatal flaw: a guarantor roster that includes Russia or gives Russia and China a veto over any collective response. A guarantee you must ask the aggressor to approve is not a guarantee at all. Ukraine already has a piece of paper named Budapest. It offered assurances, not obligations, and Russia has broken it twice. Any new instrument that is not treaty-level, enforceable without concessions and without consensus of all guarantors, and backed by named military commitments, is just Budapest with better formatting. Trump oscillated between saying a ceasefire is unnecessary and saying that it would be preferable. The Kremlin will bank that ambiguity. A ceasefire without an enforcement regime or a verified pullback freezes lines in the invader's favour and invites pressure for stage recognition later. And that's precisely the incrementalism that Russian doctrine is designed to exploit. No one publicly tackled the questions that decide wars once the cameras go. These three questions: land, law and leverage. And any talk of land swaps runs into Ukrainian constitutional bars on altering borders without a referendum and overwhelming public resistance. Pretending this can be finessed stores up a legitimacy crisis for Kyiv and a propaganda harvest for Moscow. And Zelensky's October 2022 decree bars talks with Putin. Yes, Kyiv can revisit it, but until it does, even the choreography of a trilateral summit has a legal tripwire that needs to be sorted out before Zelensky can even shake hands with Putin. Reparations, the return of abducted children, sanctions snap back, limits on Russian missile deployments and UAVs, And inspections on the occupied borderlands were not set out in public, and without these a peace is simply a pause. European leaders talked of a ceasefire and NATO-style guarantees, but they were not the ones making the calls to Moscow. Having self-excluded from sustained high-level contacts in 2022 to 2024, Europe is now urging firmness from the sidelines, while Washington freelances. That weakness, coherence, that weakens coherence and makes it easier for the Kremlin to split messages. Some in Washington now cite the 2022 Istanbul Papers as a guide, and those drafts demanded caps on Ukraine's forces and a guarantor Russia and China could block collective defense. Sorry. Repackaging that architecture as progress would formalize Ukraine's vulnerability and shift the burden of deterrence onto Europe without US muscle. That's precisely the configuration the Kremlin prefers. Russian negotiation, the doctrine of Russian negotiation, prizes the adversary's perception so that he chooses the option you want while believing it was his idea. In the Alaska-Washington sequence, Moscow ceded lines about security guarantees and comprehensive peace that sound constructive, yet carry embedded vetoes and stage concessions. Against that method, careful adjectives are not a defence, structures are. If Washington wants more than a truce that collapses, the package must have at least 5 features. It must have automatic, not consultative, activation upon a verified breach with a defined menu. So air defence coverage, long-range strike authorization and logistics pipelines from day one. It must have a European tripwire presence in western and central Ukraine under a multilateral mandate with US ISR and logistics in depth. It must have named forces. It must have inspectable missile and drone caps in occupied Crimea and across the border regions, tied to sanctions relief that snaps back automatically. And it must have timetabled returns of abducted children and prisoners of war and ICRC access, plus a victims' reparation mechanism financed through sanctioned assets. Any temporary administrative lines must be explicitly, without prejudice, and paired with a timetable for demilitarization belts that investigators can enter. Without these, a guarantee is a headline. With them, the Kremlin must either accept real constraint or expose its bad faith early. The nicest possible version of Monday's meeting is that it bought time. The most realistic reading is that it traded steel for sentiment, while Moscow pocketed advantages from Alaska. Peace made of warm words will not outlast the first test shot. Peace made of triggers, troops, timelines and teeth just might. Until Washington and Europe has published that architecture, Ukraine is being asked to trust a promise it cannot safely cash.